Welcome to the Design Vault, a show about the past, present, and future of design. The Design Vault is a conversation hosted by Shum and Thamer Abanami, reflecting on iconic products and ideas from the past and rethinking them from new perspectives.
I'm Thamer Abanami, and I'm joined by the always enigmatic Shum. Albert, are you pumped?
Hey everyone! Yeah, I'm totally pumped. I feel like today we're talking about a classic, a true design icon, a product that not just transformed a creative community, but it really created a whole new genre of expression, which is the Technics SL-1200 MK2.
Mark II.
Not MK1, MK2.
It's the Mark II that did all the magic, yeah.
When you look at design, where everything just fits and works, it does all the things that it's supposed to do without extra extraneous stuff. I think that's great design cues. I think the 1200 is exactly that. As someone who appreciates design but is not a designer, that's the rarefied air category for me.
That was Dan the Automator Nakamura, who we'll be hearing from throughout this episode. Dan is the innovative producer behind such projects as Gorillaz, Handsome Boy Modeling School, Deltron 3030, Dr. Octagon, and much more.
Dan's work, it's both inspiring, but also I love how he got started in the music industry. And my first exposure was through the band Gorillaz. And being designers, I was actually more drawn to the characters than the music.
Yeah.
I know, that's how shallow I am.
No, I think that they did something really interesting.
The music he produced with the Gorillaz really transcended genres from hip-hop to pop and rock, and really thankful for him taking his time to share his journey and how the 1200 really influenced the way he made music.
You know, when I was getting into the Technics 1200 turntables myself, you know, I have many of his records on vinyl. One of my favorite beats of all time is his beat for Blue Flowers. You know, I have a couple of 1200s, and I think it would be better to hear the expert view from Dan than from me.
Yeah. So Thamer, how do we break this down?
So we'll start with some context on the history of turntables.
Yeah, let's do this.
We have to go back to 1857. So in 1857, something surprising happened. Do you know that the first sound was actually recorded in 1857? But there was one catch. No one could play it back. It's by a French inventor named Edouard Léon Scott de Martinville, who created something called the phonoautograph. It visually recorded sound waves on paper, but there was no way to hear them. And his goal was really to study sound and not entertain people. And if you fast forward to 2008, some scientists were finally able to play back his recordings, including an eerie snippet of Eau Claire de Lune from 1860. But this takes us now to 1877. Your buddy, Thomas Edison.
Yeah. Wow. TE.
Yeah. TE. And really, you get into the first playback device. He created this design. He gave it to one of his people. The person actually created it. And of course, Thomas will get the credit as the inventor.
Right.
We know how that works.
Because it only takes one individual to
I
create
guess.
anything new. So.
In patent land, surely. So it was the first machine that could both record and play back sound. And it's the phonograph. Is that true, Albert? Could it record?
Yeah, it could record. And actually, the way it record, again, it's to me, it seems so obvious now, but back then, like everything is being invented literally, turning something, a vibration, sound waves, and then be able to capture that and then replay it. It was quite unique in terms of the phonograph was the first time that was able us to reproduce sound, capture and reproduce it.
Yeah, I think it used a tinfoil covered cylinder to record the vibrations, and that same cylinder is what was used for playback. And do you know what the first recording was, Albert?
No.
It was a pop sensation of the era. Mary Had a Little Lamb.
Oh, yeah.
People were stunned, and they really thought it was some kind of magic trick. It was so bleeding edge advanced for that time.
Well, Little Lambs always get people.
It's a banger.
Like that's, yeah.
A little piece of practical poetry. Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow.
So now we go 10 years into the future, and something happens. which is the gramophone.
The gramophone is for grandmas?
The gramophone.
Gramophone. Okay.
So Edison's phonograph was groundbreaking, but it was still clunky. It had this cylinder.
And you have to like change, it's like changing cartridges, right? These big cylinders. You have to.
It's not Spotify. And so you have this gentleman by the name of Emil Berliner who introduced this concept of a flat disc instead of a cylinder, right?
Okay.
It was much easier to mass produce, much easier to store.
Much more portable, I guess, in some ways.
Yeah, totally. And Berliner is one of those people that kind of went horizontal with a lot of ideas. And, so he did this flat disc thing and he patented it, but he also patented the idea of selling records separately.
Wow. So he had this whole distribution model and an ecosystem.
Yeah, he was thinking that, he launched the modern...
But he didn't figure out subscription, did he?
My research did not come back with any of that, but it did come back with a bunch of weird stuff here. And, some people will say he launched the modern record industry. And this led to the rise of record labels, artists selling records, and music becoming more of a home entertainment staple. So now you have this media that has been invented that now is more cheaper to produce, easier to store, more durable than the cylinder. Yep.
And this idea of like the master, owning the master, right? That we press records, like the whole production of records, I find fascinating.
And what happens next is this interesting thing that plays out again in this kind of media technology, which is a format war. in 1948, 49. You have this battle between the LP and the 45. And let's kind of explain what those are. In 1948, Columbia introduces this 33 1/3 rotations per minute, or RPM LP. These are called the long playing records. This allowed full albums on one disc. In 1949, RCA Victor fought back with the 45 RPM single. It was smaller, which made it perfect for jukeboxes. And again, those were the thing, right?
Right. But the playback was shorter, right?
Yeah, playback was shorter. So you get this kind of dual format situation where the LP format wins for albums and the 45 format wins for singles. And both are still in use today. You still see things like 12-inch singles, and we can get into what makes those special because the grooves are fatter and you can get more stuff out of them. But it's probably a good time in this timeline as we kind of come out of this format war in the late 40s, because the next stuff that's going to happen, I think, that's interesting for this episode is really about Matsushita. It was later known as Panasonic, right? But we should probably talk about the history of this company and then jump back into the turntables they made.
And we have to go back to 1918. In Japan at that time, it's post-World War I, but it's also the rise of a lot of industrialization, I would say, in Japan, and industries were literally being founded.
Yeah.
And a young man by the name of Konosuke Matsushita founded what would eventually become Panasonic.
He was only 23 years old,
yeah,
right?
Like there was so much being created and a lot of new industries. Konosuke had the foresight to think about what does the market need. And so him and his wife, and along with his brother-in-law, in a really tiny house, created a startup, and they made electrical plugs by hand because there was a shortage of electrical plugs. And the simple improvement of a plug that you could attach and detach and allow you to plug in your light bulb, and with capital of just 100 yen.
100 yen back then would roughly be equivalent to $1,100 today, right?
Oh yeah. So that was the startup capital, and he didn't have any formal education, no connection, just this passion, this belief that making electrical products for everyone was his calling.
Yeah, I think what was amazing looking into the story of Matsushita was he wasn't just thinking about the next few years. He actually had a 250-year plan for the company. Let me kind of read you a quote from one of his speeches. "The mission of a manufacturer is to overcome poverty by producing an abundant supply of goods. Even though water from a tap is a processed product with a price, no one objects if a passerby drinks from a roadside tap. That is because the supply of water is plentiful and its price is low. The mission of a manufacturer is to create material abundance by providing goods as plentiful and inexpensive as tap water. This is how we can banish poverty, bring happiness to people's lives, and make this world into a paradise."
Yeah, it's definitely inspiring. That calling, having a 250-year plan for such a young company. It's bold, it's ambitious. He really took it to heart to make this vision a reality. And if you break down his 250-year plans into kind of 10, 25 years period, he kind of framed it around like a 10-year construction phase, and then a 10-year active building phase, and then a 5-year phase of constant refinement and improvement of each stage.
Yeah, it's kind of like a mix between long-term product road mapping and technology S-curves. And it's quite fascinating to just understand that they were thinking this at the time. And also it'd be interesting to kind of think, how did that affect their products? Who thinks that way today, right?
Without a long-term plan, you kind of, if you're only short-term focused, you're constantly kind of chasing the next thing. And it's really hard if you're just being opportunistic. And we've worked in companies where when you have large scale, it's hard to change, but you do need to have a way to frame your outlook. Where do you want to go versus where the market is just driving you?
100%. And so it starts in 1918 with manufactured plugs or assembly or handmade. And then 5 years later, they get the first big break. It was a bicycle lamp.
Yeah.
It was a big breakthrough. In 1923, it was a battery-powered bicycle lamp. And and bicycles are the major
transportation, right.
mode of transportation, right? It's almost like saying you invented headlights for cars. And so you're now a supplier of. And so most lamps at the time only lasted 3 hours. His lasted 40.
No way, 40 hours.
Yeah,
Wow.
so the 10x value thing is happening here, right? Retailers didn't believe him, so he left lamps in stores overnight to demonstrate their longevity. And it worked. The lamp sold, and Matsushita's reputation for quality began to grow. And it's very important. There's long-term thinking, and there's a quality obsession here.
By the 1930s, Matsushita was expanding into radio production because there was a shortage or a need, a demand for radios. And he also pushed the company towards building electric motor and opened his first overseas factory in Shanghai, China. So this is in the 30s. So 31, they created the 3-tube radio, which won the first prize in a national radio competition. That factory in Shanghai represented this idea of global expansion.
And, this is the 30s now. After that, World War II happens. And World War II was a tumultuous time around the world, especially in Japan. How does that affect a company?
You have to pivot. And I think post-war, as we all know, Japan was devastated, and the reconstruction of Japan and rebuilding of Japan was a totally different set of conditions.
It's an interesting time for a lot of Japanese companies, right? Post-war period, Matsushita helped rebuild Japan's economy by making affordable washing machines, televisions, and refrigerators, the so-called 3 sacred treasures of post-war Japan.
Right, every household needed these.
Yeah, and when you go back to the philosophy of the faucet philosophy management, right, to provide these goods at high quality, low cost, this was the perfect timing for that philosophy, and this philosophy existed for decades before. So it's a perfect time now for the ethos of Matsushita to play out, and it was very, very successful. That's the 50s and 60s. When we get into the 70s, you get into 2 things that are happening that are interesting to note for the listeners. One, there's another format war.
Yeah, it's a recurring theme. No one can agree ever. Everyone's technology is better than someone else's.
Totally. So you have a format war that on one side puts Matsushita and the VHS format for video cassettes against Sony and their Betamax format. And it was a fight to become the dominant standard for home video. And the decision to develop this was a major gamble. Matsushita's engineers believed that longer recording time was more important to consumers than slightly superior picture quality, which Betamax offered.
But I feel like there's a whole episode there.
Yeah, because what this allowed them to do is really they were just pushing adoption, right? And they were just outflanked Sony on this. But I digress, because the episode is about turntables.
Well, no, I do love digressing. I feel like that's all I do.
I know.
But stepping back, like I think at that time, especially the 70s, this is the rise of Japan Inc.
100%.
Like these global companies like Matsushita, Sony, they were setting the standard, not just for Japan, it was for the world. That really speaks to the power of Japan industrialization, having a way to design, engineer, execute, build, and deliver. That was, to me, the Japan Inc. machine.
100%. A lot of the products that are Japanese origin in our podcasts have this pattern to it, right? This pattern of Japan Inc., the rise of hardware, the rise of electronics. But, Albert, we're here to talk about turntables and specifically
right. The 1200.
The 1200 Mark II. In 1970, Matsushita, via the Technics brand, introduced something that completely changed turntable technology. It was the SP10, and it was the world's first direct drive turntable. Before Technics entered the scene, most turntables were belt driven, and that meant the platter was connected to the motor by a rubber belt. I want you to imagine a rubber band, right? Belts stretch, they slip, and they break over time, and it causes speed inconsistencies, what people call wow and flutter. And it was a nightmare for professional use. Try to be an FM disc jockey trying to play a record and this thing is warbling.
Right.
Or, not
right. It would sound like crappy on the radio, right?
Yeah. So in 1970, the SP10 comes out, and the engineer behind the project, and there are many people behind this, but the name that sticks out is Shuichi Obata, eliminated the belts and provided a more accurate and consistent speed, connecting the platter directly to the motor.
So it was a very clear engineering problem.
Very clear.
And very, I would say, novel solution.
Yes. And the SP10 was initially designed for professional broadcasting, where speed precision was crucial. But also, by having the direct drive solution, it also allowed to have more torque, which allowed quicker startup time. When you hit play...
So the electric motor was directly
connected to the platter.
To the platter.
Right. And instead of taking a few seconds or whatever for the thing to come from slow to regular speed, it took less time and you got the instant start.
Right.
Or in that time, what was thought of as more instantaneous. It wasn't instant. And that was a problem. You know, that's a problem that begins to solve and gets better as they release more turntables. So again, huge deal in professional studios, but it wouldn't be long before this technology transformed DJing and club culture as well. So now we get into 71, Albert. Can you tell us about the 1100?
Yeah, so Technics launched the SL-1200 in 1971. And it was an attempt to bring that direct drive technology that we mentioned to the mass market, to consumers.
So from FM radio disc jockeys and professionals to consumers, right?
And you could buy this turntable and bring it home. And Matsushita decided in order to make that consumer product, they also needed a new brand and created a company called Technics. So SL-1200 was the first direct drive consumer turntable. It really, in some ways, unlocked not just a new set of customers, but really a whole new audience.
Yeah, and one of those audiences, it's DJs.
I'm not a DJ expert. Like, there's disc jockeys for radio, and then there's DJs for clubs, and they're different, right?
The DJ in the club is trying to create an atmosphere, and what you started seeing, you would have two turntables, you would have some type of mixer between them, and it allowed...
So it's much more interactive with the audience. People are dancing on the floor.
Interactive with the audience, more performance-driven, and the music could be continuous because you could crossfade between two records. You know, and so you had these club DJs doing disco and whatever at the time. But then there was this new underground culture that was emerging that wasn't really happening in the clubs yet. And it was something happening in the Bronx in New York. And it was called hip hop.
Cool.
DJ Kool Herc, a Jamaican American DJ in the Bronx, started using two 1100s. And what he was doing at the time, because hip hop is a culture of music and breakdancing and graffiti. And so breakdancers were responding to this. There were these giant block parties, street parties, or also house parties. And what's interesting here is what Kool Herc was doing is he was taking what's called the break, the part of the song that doesn't have any singing, but it's really about the drums. It's kind of that part that the dancers responded to the most. And what he was doing is he would extend the break. So he would take 2 copies of the same record, and as the break finishes, or is about to finish, he has the other record on the start of the break, and then he will move to that, and then just go back and forth with the break, extending that song to have a much longer break for the break dancers to respond to.
Right.
And that was a big innovation. And this technique, isolating and repeating the break, became one of the foundations of hip-hop DJing. And this was an accident of history. SL-1100 was not designed for DJs. So then you get from 71 to 72.
Yeah, so the 72 era, and this is literally the birth of the icon, the Technics SL-1200 MK2 was launched. And the 1200 was targeted for audiophiles, and it was marketed as a hi-fi turntable for home use. And again, didn't end up that way. That's not how it ended.
But that's not how it ended up being used. At first, it was the 1200 Mark I was just a high fidelity turntable, but found this new audience. Again, we talked a little bit about what was happening with the 1100, but it wasn't so pronounced and it wasn't so widespread. When the 1200 comes out, DJs everywhere discovered the rock solid speed, rock solid durability, isolation, and it made it perfect for things like beat matching and blending that disco DJs were doing at the time.
So in 1979, the DJ's choice is
the 1200 Mark II.
And I think this is where our story kind of takes a turn to be about a product that transcends culture and became a icon.
Totally. When Technics perfected the 1200 Mark I, that perfection was really about trying to understand how people were using it. And they sent engineers literally to the clubs in Chicago to watch how DJs were using 1200s.
So they actually
observe
and decide, like, hey, wait a minute, we should actually lean in
100%. Yes.
And not try to, like, hey, dismiss it.
100%. And we see the story happen time and time again with other music equipment and things like that that we've discussed in this podcast. And it is companies that are smart enough to identify an emerging audience that they didn't anticipate and lean into that, create markets. And they created this market for the DJ turntable that they dominated. And so they came back with a focused and deliberate iteration that was the Technics 1200 Mark II. It was built on the 1200, but it had these features for DJs. So it had a more powerful motor with higher torque for more instantaneous starts. I think you're now getting less than a second. You're probably like now 0.7, or you're right.
So much more responsive,
much more quick. Another thing it had was the 1200 originally had this little pitch control knob for slight speed adjustments in case there was a problem with the record and things like that. Here they put this kind of long slider that could pitch the record up or down by 8%. And it really allowed these precise tempo adjustments in combination with this other thing they added, which was quartz. And, quartz mechanism allowed the timing of the platter to be super precise. That allows you to do things like long blends in a mix. If you were doing techno DJs were doing this thing where the 2 beats can be going together for minutes at a time. You couldn't do this on a turntable that couldn't hold the time. Right.
We go out of sync, right?
Totally, yeah. And it becomes what we call a train wreck. You can hear the beats colliding, right? They improved the vibration damping of the bass, which makes it perfect for loud club environments. Because what happens is you have these giant sound systems with a lot of bass, and you would get feedback through the needles if you were playing it on a regular turntable, like a home, right? And so this isolation helped the sound that's coming out of this to be clean.
And it sounds like all these features were designed specifically for DJs.
Yes, it was laser focused.
Right.
Before that, DJs were manually adjusting speeds to beat match. They would put their hands on a platter and maybe move it with their fingers a little bit, and spin the label, all that stuff. No, they don't have to do that anymore.
For me, if you could break it down, it's really about belt-driven turntables that were bad for DJs, and how the high torque direct drive turntable like the MK2 solves such a fundamental need.
100%. The belt drive versus the high torque direct drive topic, it actually came up in our conversation with Dan, the Automator and he put it succinctly.
Imagine a big rubber band around the cylinder. When you try to release the record to like mix it to another record, there's a pickup noise unless you learn how to push it just right. So it's very delicate on the belt drive. Whereas the Technics 1200, it wasn't instantaneous, but it was very fast pickup and it was very rock solid. So you didn't necessarily hear a whoop to when it started. It made it a lot easier to mix the record in.
Now, this direct drive innovation changed everything. DJs could now rely on these rock solid turntables that were stable from a speed standpoint, and it allowed seamless beat matching, precision mixing, and allowed new art forms to emerge, like scratching.
To create an icon, it's not necessarily about you set out to create an icon. I think it's to set out to create something that solves an audience needs in a way that is purpose driven, but also, and this is kind of my take on some design icons, it became a symbol of a movement, a symbol of an audience.
It was used by these DJs that you know many of our listeners have heard about, but maybe don't know their work. Grandmaster Flash, Frankie Knuckles, Jeff Mills. Every major DJ of this era is using 1200 Mark II.
Yeah, it was a iconic device for iconic creators.
We should probably take a pause and talk about scratching, because this is kind of what a lot of people associate with.
Yeah, the performance part,
yes.
Right? The sound. It's such a identifiable sound.
100%. Maybe we take a step back from the Mark II for a second, because scratching started before the Mark II, and it was most likely, around the era of the 1100 that this was happening. It was a revolutionary technique at the time, and it really transformed the turntable.
And it's literally the needle scratching on the record. Right?
Yes, and it transforms the turntable into an instrument, right? It's a musical instrument. And it all started with Grand Wizard Theodore. So we're back to the Bronx. And according to the lore...
Wow, this is the origin story of scratching.
This is the origin story of scratching. And according to legend, Grand Wizard Theodore accidentally discovered scratching when his mother yelled at him while he was practicing on his turntables. As he held the record in place, remember we talked about slip mats.
Wow, this is like the apple falling on you.
Yeah, because a lot of what you do when you're kind of cueing a record is you're holding the spot you want to start on, because you may not want to start with the beginning of the song. You might want to start kind of in a specific point on the beat, on time.
Right.
You hold the record under the needle and you kind of just move it back and forth so you can just kind of figure out where you want to start it. Yeah. And so, according to the legend, Grand Wizard Theodore is sitting there practicing.
Theodore!
And
turn that crap off.
Yeah, as he held the record in place, moving it back and forth, he realized that there was a sound coming that was unique. And he began incorporating it into his DJ sets, turning this mistake into an art form all of its own.
So Theodore starts scratching, but the DJ start like picking it up and using it in performances, or?
Yeah, everything spreads like wildfire. It's culture, it's ideas. And in 75, you have this big moment, 1975, where Grandmaster Flash, inspired by Theodore's discovery, perfected and popularized scratching in his DJ routines. And he introduced these precise rhythmic scratches and combined it with something that he called quick mix theory. So one of the things that was popular at the time in the 70s and early 80s is this ability to cut back and forth really quickly between two different songs, almost like you're just jump cutting.
Right. Instead of like creating the breaks, now you're going back and forth
between actual songs, but you're doing it with artistry and you're doing it on the beat of this other song and mixing things together and actually communicating almost a new thing. It's almost like a very quick cut mixtape happening in real time with no intros, right?
It is a new sound, right?
Totally. There's a movie called Wild Style. It's one of the best, I think.
Oh, that was actually my DJ handle, DJ Wild Style.
It has a lot of... It's like a time capsule of 70s New York and hip-hop emergence. And so there's a scene where Grandmaster Flash is doing his scratch routine. It's amazing. And in 81, Grandmaster Flash releases what makes scratching becoming a more mainstream sound, the album The Adventure of Grandmaster Flash on the Wheels of Steel. It was the first commercially released record to feature live scratching, It was on Sugar Hill Records, and I think Flash used 3 turntables to blend multiple records, creating this collage of scratches, loops, and beat juggling. And he proved that scratching wasn't just a club technique or a thing that was, you would do it just kind of once or twice going between 2 songs. It was really a new way to make music. When you get into the 80s, right now in 83, you have this music visionary that I'm sure most of our listeners have heard of, Herbie Hancock. Herbie Hancock, for people who don't know, is this jazz musician who was known for really not kind of being stuck in the original jazz era where he started. He was really evolving, and he was really excited about technology influencing music. He was one of the first jazz people to use synthesizers when they were the size of rooms and things like that. And so he has his fingers on the pulse of what's going on. And in his famous song, Rocket.
Spelt Rockit.
One word.
Rocket.
Yes. And it was the first hit song. This was being played on MTV when MTV played music videos all the time. It was a really crazy video. You should go check it out. We'll put it in the notes. It's these like robotic animatronic things that were going back and forth percussively to the scratches. It was really eerie and interesting, and nothing was like it.
And scratching was front and center.
Yes.
In that it wasn't just some embellishment.
The lead instrument. Yeah. And I think Herbie Hancock was playing a synthesizer. And there's a DJ by the name of Grand Mixer DXT. He was the DJ that was doing the scratches over this futuristic jazz funk production.
So Rocket really made scratching mainstream, right?
Yeah, every TV that had MTV on it, this is being blasted all the time, and people saw this weird thing. It's not just the Bronx, it's not just clubs, it's on TV.
It's global, right?
It's global. What's really interesting is these things usually, as they do, keep evolving. When somebody kind of introduces a new technique, somebody keeps taking it further. And when we had our conversation with Dan, the Automator, we just had a nice deep dive on how scratching evolved past this era.
Styles of scratching. I'm not going to go to like who invented this, who invented that, but like the first one that's significant to me is Jam Master Jay from Run DMC. It's like a percussive instrument, just it's very powerful. That was a style. Then the next significant style to me, the West Coast, LA, like you had Rodney and Joe Cooley, and then you had like all the Mike Scratch Pickle and all that stuff. They started taking scratching to a higher level where it got tighter and more technical. But also, let's not forget about the second style, which I will talk about, is Philadelphia style. And you had these guys like Grand Dragon KD, Fresh Going Miz, Jazzy Jeff. The Philly thing, they kind of invented what is now known, I guess it's the transform scratch, like blah, 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 blah. And then like that thing is like a Philly thing. Sort of Cash Money too, sorry. Oh, don't forget him. And all these guys, so that's a style. It was like groovier, like kind of, I wouldn't say it was more musical, but it was more music vignette thing. For people who don't know these guys, let me see. There's a song by this guy Steady B called Bring the Beat Back, and it's like you'll hear the scratch inside that just sounds like kind of music playing and kind of cutting in and everything, and it's kind of amazing. And that's a great example of early versions of that. DJ culture learned a lot from Cash Money, who could cut really fast and hard. And then the West Coast guys brought it further to like the technical side, I should say. That's the next rev of that. Because that stuff all happened in parallel at points. But somewhere along it's like Premier came, and Premier was scratching choruses for Gangstar, for other groups he was producing. And they were so loose and funky. He has like an internal metronome. There's a swing set in there. I can hear it. And he's just doing it. It's amazing too. So those are the ones of the early era. It keeps going.
The thing for me is not just about scratching, which has become its own art form, also how simply by facilitating something like seamless tempo matching with the pitch slider, you could, as a producer, not a DJ, we're now talking about how this is impacting producers, you could start listening to how pieces from different songs, even different genres, would work together. And then you would do something called sampling. So sampling is when you take a sound from a record or from another source, and then you put it in what's called a sampler, where you can manipulate that sound and create original music with it.
Are you digitizing the sound? Is that what you sample?
Yes, you are digitizing sound, because samplers in the old days had this very limited memory, and they could only take a very short snippet. And so with the 1200 turntable, remember we talked about that pitch slider. That pitch slider can go all the way up by 8% and all the way down by 8%. And so if I only have a few seconds, like single digit seconds to put in my sampler, what's a way I can get more of this, a bigger sample? What I would do is I would pitch the record up by 8% or play it as a 45 if it's a 33. So I'm playing it at higher speed, record that segment that I wanted, but now it's pitched up. So I need to pitch it back down digitally in the sampler. But when it's not a lossless conversion. You're going to get things like pixelation of sound, which is really derezzing. You get
it's almost like adding texture to it.
Yes, it adds texture. And so that became a big part of the aesthetic of hip hop is you can take a beat, you can then put it in your sampler by pitching it down from your pitched up capture. It has a crunch to it. It has an aesthetic, a sonic feel.
And it also feels organic in a weird way.
Yeah.
Even though it's digital, I always found like that's the kind
100%.
of the irony of, not irony, but like the unique part about scratching. It creates something that didn't feel like it was artificial. It felt very percussive.
If you record a record really fast and put it in a sampler and slow it down, it gives like artifacts, which is cool in a certain type of, I guess the best way is Cypress Hill kind of way. So that kind of stuff is cool, or you want a really high pitched up vocal. But the thing that probably works between the two is with the pitch, you can match the speeds of stuff. And so you can make them blend with each other. And those blends are basically the whole art of DJing. But in production, you start hearing things go together. You go, oh, this will work well with this. So it's a good template to do that.
So now we get to the part of the show where everybody's excited because this is where Albert puts on his black turtleneck.
Well, and also my white frame glasses. I just want to make sure people can visualize what I'm wearing.
But you are not wearing the beret today.
No, my hairpiece. I'm wearing my hairpiece.
So Albert puts on the black turtleneck and over-stylized glasses, and this is the part where he gives us the design analysis of what makes this turntable so iconic. And I might not be able to contain myself, Albert, so I might interrupt you through this.
Yeah, let me kind of set the context. Consumer electronic in the 70s and 80s were, to me, some of the most exciting designs. It was such a explosion of different design language, different design styles even. And I think for a lot of Japanese manufacturers, they were really also trying to create more premium, more luxurious, more high-end. They were traditionally viewed as like, low-end, cheap electronics. And for Technics, I think what really stands out to me was this perception of quality and precision. If it was in the design brief, that would be the first thing, right? That functionalism was expressed in this kind of very commanding presence. It felt, you look at it, it's like that is a solid piece of kit.
It is about 24 pounds heavy.
Yeah.
And I will not go into why my elbows hurt to this day from carrying all that junk.
Yeah. Had die-cast aluminum body, 4 robust engineered isolation feet that remove vibration, and a platter, this solid platter. I think it rated about 2 kilograms, which is about 5 pounds, 4.4, and had this finely machined strobe dots on the platter. Back to that quartz timing. It uses that pattern to keep track of the speed of the platter.
This is kind of fun because I got to, I've used these tables for a long time, for many years. And we mentioned the strobe dots that ring the platter. It wasn't just for visual monitoring with the pop-up light. You actually brush your fingers onto it to slow down a record. Because when you're mixing, sometimes you just want to slow it down. You're at the right speed, but you just need to slow it down or push it a little bit to catch it up with the other record. Those were designed perfectly for DJs because it had just the amount of texture. It was a visual indicator that the platter was moving at a certain speed, but also you would brush your fingers and either like a brake on a bicycle, just a slight brake, or push a little bit. And you had this little pop-up target light, which projected this focused beam onto the record surface and allowed you to cue the record in a dark environment. The control panel had these flat buttons that were brushed metal, and they were super solid. They felt like they would never fail. And you knew when you clicked it that you clicked it.
I do want to reflect also on, and in that era of Japanese design, there's an interesting part about proportions and typography
100%.
and labeling, where I feel like it's almost like, and I'm going to digress now. It reminds me of anime.
Yeah.
It has this very interesting proportion of fonts. It's, I would say, playful, but it's very distinctive. I don't know, Thamer. How,
Yes, no, 100%. Like, it really captures an era.
yeah.
It was like the typography and the graphic design and how things were laid out. You look at it and you're now teleported back to a certain era.
Yeah.
Right.
And it doesn't look dated. It just looked very distinct to that era.
Yeah, it looks timeless.
Timeless,
right?
yeah.
Yes.
But
also not,
but
right?
different. Right. And it's different than like Swiss Modern, like a lot of the Swiss Grid, like the font choices and the finish. To me, was very distinctive to that era in Japanese consumer electronics.
Yeah, and it wasn't just Matsushita, Technics, Panasonic, all that, National, which is all under one umbrella.
Right.
You saw this with JVC, you saw this with Sony, you saw this with everybody.
Nakamichi.
Oh yeah, well you're a high-end guy. I'm just a man of the people.
Sorry.
Yeah. So what's fascinating is how these seemingly small design details and decisions become crucial.
Yeah.
The Mark II design is really iconic in its simplicity. It is the Kleenex of turntables.
The way I look at the 1200 is like it's a workhorse, but in the same way like a 911 Porsche is a workhorse. You know what I mean? To be honest, the only thing they could change about a 1200 to make it better is, more audiophile of an arm or something, which I think they may have attempted. But here's the thing. I've been around them so long, I feel that's like what a turntable should look like for a DJ. I have trouble going to see DJs. You know what I mean? Like, I have trouble DJing on those things. First of all, the pliers don't move, and I'm so used to something moving. But beyond all that, a 1200 looks like what a turntable should look like, as far as I'm concerned. The little ring to hold the 45, the pitch slider being how it is. Sure, maybe the mechanics of the tone arm could be a little different here and there, but little red light, flickering laser thing to see if you're going faster or slower. It's just everything that I see a turntable being in my fantasy life, meaning looking at rappers on TV to now. You know what I mean?
The designers, the engineers, they hit it square on the mark. And we should discuss some of those big ideas.
Yeah, I think this is my favorite part of every show is we don't talk about the story and the design only, but really when we do the research, what big ideas and takeaways did we have? And for me, what hit me is this is really an example of product market fit, and especially this concept and idea of market pull. Albert, you and I have created many products together, and sometimes those products we were trying to push into a market. Like, hey, you need a thing, and let's push it, right? And some of these products
maybe,
were pulled.
Maybe a kinder way would be like, we're trying to create demand.
Demand gen, yes. Yeah. And there are times where the market will pull the product out of us, right? And I think you will agree, Albert, that it's much better for the market to pull the product than
in most cases, yes. In most cases,
and especially the case of manufacturing, right?
Yeah,
where you have all this, it's different when you're running a SaaS company and marginal costs reaches zero,
or you're trying to disrupt the market with new technology.
Yeah. No, here you have this hardware, and you have assembly lines and factories that need to be utilized, and you have parts and inventory and things that if you don't get it right, you're going to lose a lot of money. And so I'm just fascinated by the market pull angle of this. The 1200 was conceived for audiophiles, the Mark I, and DJs discover it, and it becomes ideal for some of their use cases. And like we mentioned earlier, Matsushita, aka Technics, leaned in. They didn't say, "Oh yeah, these are just a bunch of people in the Bronx or a bunch of people in clubs that are a minority."
Yeah, it would have been easy to dismiss, actually. Be like, oh, yeah, what's the TAM of DJs? Like, how many DJs are there in the United States or in the world? And what are they willing to pay for? And if you kind of did the back on napkin sketch, you'd probably be like, oh, I'm not sure there's a market there.
100%. And the DJs effectively pulled this product out of Technics, and Technics, to their credit, leaned in, right? And this demand and word of mouth evangelism and cultural adoption really signaled the deep product market fit. And, a bunch of things happen after that with co-creation and community influence. slip mats, custom cartridges, things that became more specialized. But really, to me, I think it's a great story of how a company locked in and then became the standard for this category, for this era of technology, for DJing.
For me, I really love this pattern of this continuous improvement, this idea of how do we find, like, I think a lot of design icon, we assume like, hey, designers created the perfect design and just like hit it out of the ballpark, versus like, no, it's usually actually through constant refinement or understanding the different needs and building on it. Techniques really show this idea of Kaizen, this idea of continuous improvement. Incremental improvement actually is important. And I think sometimes in software design that we do, Thamer, the idea that like, hey, you could constantly make it better. It seems so natural because we can always update, we can always fix bugs. But in hardware, that's actually not necessarily the case. It takes a lot of work to improve not just the design, but also the manufacturing. And Kaizen was really a manufacturing technique as much as it is a design of new features or new improvements.
When we were doing software stuff, I think we were talking about, there's some magic equation of iteration over time that gets you to quality.
Yeah.
And it's a lot easier to do it in software.
Oh, I just remember like you have to create new assembly, new manufacturing lines, like this idea of like, hey, we're going to add this special compound of rubber into the platter. Well, where do you get the rubber and how do you add it in?
Yes, exactly. And then the supplier says, I don't have any more. And you switch to another and they don't have the same rubber, right?
Right. And the sense of Kaizen, this continuous improvement, is core to creating iconic product.
100%. And if we think earlier about the 250-year planning and the 25-year segments, and you had this kind of 10-10-5, 10 years, 10 years, 5 years.
Yeah.
You can see how that kind of vision and culture would result in a turntable that had all this iteration,
right?
And how it just dominated for the whole era of the turntable.
We could talk about so many other industries that practice Kaizen, like obviously the automotive industry or the camera industry, which I think is still in practice today.
But
this is the big but.
There's a big downside to this, right? You get into some blind spots and an innovator's dilemma. Sometimes you can have an over-reliance on iteration while you miss something bigger happening in the background.
Yeah, and I think that's the challenge of having legacy.
We have a diagram that kind of breaks this down that we'll post in the show notes, where we kind of show how DJ platforms evolved from 1979. We start there, we could start earlier, to today. And we use these technology S-curves. And the first S-curve was the turntable. And it was the Technics 1200 Mark II that was that definitive S-curve. But something happens. A disruption happens, which is digital, right? Which was happening a lot at this time. And a company called Pioneer. And Pioneer created the CDJ. And the CDJ was essentially a CD player for DJs. And let's think back to my elbows. One of the toughest things about being a DJ is having to schlep your crates of records back and forth.
Well, along with your 20-pound turntables.
In many cases, the turntables were at the venue or whatever, but you're carrying records. And Seattle, we have lots of hills, but I won't go into, this is not going to become like joint therapy.
And you can't carry on your little scooter, can you?
No. My Vespa, no.
Yeah.
Which we should probably do an episode on that. But imagine a world where instead of having to carry these heavy crates, you could just have a book of CDs for DJs that were coming up, that were new, that didn't want to create these giant vinyl collections. That presented an opportunity. Now, not all DJs were into that, but really, eventually, the sales take over and this CD era begins. But then something else happens. These kind of eras are overlapping, but you have this thing called Serato, a company that did this software that allowed you to play music from your laptop, connected to your mixer and then your turntable, and you would have these special records that Serato made that were basically a time code, a sine wave. You just put the needle wherever you want on the record and it would jump to the digital section in the song. And the performance was so good and latency was so good that you can scratch. In fact, DJ Jazzy Jeff was one of their first kind of ambassadors and would just demonstrate this.
So it's like digital scratching.
Digital scratching. And it was pretty good. And you had purists who would say, I'd never touch the stuff.
I would never touch that stuff.
Yes, of course, you're a purist. But you're a DJ like Jazzy Jeff. He jumps on planes and goes all over the world. He would rather carry a laptop and a few records than carry these crates. That's what happens. So you have these two things happening at the same time. You have the software on the laptop with the people that want to stick to the turntables, and you had the CD players. So these things merge and give you this third S curve.
Right. This is the rising incident in this story, right?
Yes, which is digital controllers plus laptops. So now you just have to have this controller. Some of them weighed as little as 5 pounds. You could have 2 platters and a mixer thing in the middle and a laptop, and you were good to go. It was also cheaper. 2 turntables at the time were about $499, so that's $1,000. A decent mixer is another $500 to $700 at that time. So now you're $2,000 in, and you probably already have a laptop. And so you can get a digital controller today for $150. That's decent. And you can get one that's more expensive for $1,000.
Wow.
And that's pro.
Right. Back to it literally disrupted the market.
It disrupted the market. And that's where majority of DJing is happening today. The club standard is a digital controller made by Pioneer, but Pioneer doesn't own the market. There are a lot of players. And we're moving on to even maybe something more with automation.
Right.
Now you have this, software that can play on a tablet that can actually blend the beats itself and do these transitions themselves. And, right. A DJ may not want to use that, but a regular person that doesn't want to pay for a DJ or want to bring that aesthetic into some small gathering could start using it.
What happened to Techniques? What happened? Like, you leave me hanging there.
Okay,
Thamer.
well,
what happened to
Technics kept iterating on the turntable in 2010. They kept perfecting it, right? Just like the Porsche 911, right? It just looked the same, but they were for the people who could spot the small changes. I have the Mark Vs, which basically look like a 1200, except the pop-up light was an LED instead of
it went from Mark II to Mark III to Mark IV.
Yeah. Minimal variations in torque, minimal, very iterative things. Like, for example, the 1200 had a slider with a divot in the middle, and you can slide up and down, but that divot didn't allow you to be super precise. So, in the era of the Mark V, they have this button that allows you to lock onto 0, no divot, and things like that. So very minimal. For the casual observer, they look the same.
Right.
And they stopped production in 2010. They come back in 2019 with another 1200, but now it's priced $1,000 or more for one turntable.
Was that for collectors? Or
I think there was a lot of, there's a lot of noise, people wanting these things to come back, but I think you can't manufacture this at the price it was.
Right.
And it's, it's also very simple. The demand is not as high as it was.
Right.
But you have a vocal small segment that wants it, then you have supply, demand, its price, and the pricing is high. But really, it's now kind of for people who love nostalgia, for people who are diehard hip hop people and scratch DJs, or people who, produce in the old way or like to have.
And also, I think the audio market changed, right? Consumer electronics, turntable. It was not just about DJ. I mean, the entire industry has gone from vinyl records to CDs to streaming. So there's so much disruption has happened in the industry.
And that's really Technics' digital fumble, right? And a lot of companies in that era in Japan had digital fumbles.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. When you get disrupted, like the innovator's dilemma is a pattern that many companies struggle with. And you have such a successful legacy product like the Technics 1200, in order to shift and pivot and go enter a new market, many have tried to do that, and a lot of companies fail.
Software eats the world, and this is another example of it.
Yeah. Well, that shift from analog to digital to software to this idea of constant value being delivered through software, that's so hard to compete with when you're a traditional hardware manufacturer.
100%. You have these two factions now in today's era. You have the hardware manufacturers like Pioneer, and you have the software people like Serato and something called Rekordbox. In fact, Pioneer goes and buys Rekordbox. So you're starting to see hardware companies trying to control software platform, and then you have these the other platform trying to work deals with other hardware companies, and it's basically the same as the PC market, basically the same as all this stuff.
Yeah.
Right? So that takes us to, I think, the next big idea, Albert.
Yeah, the next big idea for me, and especially in terms of for designers, for creators, is this idea of restraint in design. And I want to take a moment to kind of define that restraint and constraints are two different things. And for me, constraints is being very clear on, especially in your design brief and your product definition. And I've used the delightful, viable, feasible framework before. But for me, constraint is really around setting boundaries, setting limits of what you want to achieve.
100%.
And I feel like so many teams, when they work on a project, they don't have constraints, and you can do anything. And
everybody wants their pet pony in the product.
Yeah, and that's the worst way to actually start a project or even design a product. So constraint is important. At the same time, you also need restraint. And sometimes that's come across as more as less, but for me, restraint is discipline, is knowing when to add more and when to take away.
It's a point of view.
Yeah, point of view. And being an editor is such an important part of design. So I've seen a lot of design work where there's not restraint and it just goes in so many different directions and loses that point of view. The 1200 MK2, the Mark II, really show this balance of constraint, but also restraint in its design.
And, you know, this idea of restraint, it comes up in our conversation with Dan, which was an amazing conversation, by the way. He kept us in stitches because he's a pretty real dude.
Yeah, and he's usually not a very restraint kind of guy.
If I was to make a turntable, for example, I would have put too much stuff on it. It would have been a little, it would have had like an extra 2 or 3 buttons. I mean, it was
Two
like
tone arms, like
whatever, and it would suck. There would be like a little drawer for a 45 ring in your like needles or something like that. It was something would have been wrong with it. You know what I mean? Like whoever did the 1200 did not miss at all.
Albert, what kind of technology, we talk about this a lot. We talked about it in the research. There's just example after example of technologies and breakthroughs in technology enabling and creating new art forms.
Yeah. And it comes across in so many different mediums. And I think the classic example is photography. And we kind of take it for granted now today. I was just shopping for a camera. The invention of photography unlocked these whole new potential. And it was initially thought of as a threat, right? They thought, photography is going to replace art, versus no, it's actually a new medium, a new way to express yourself. And likewise, when we went through that whole analog to digital, oh no, we're going to get rid of film. It's going to change photography forever. No, it actually create new ways to express yourself and to software like Photoshop and Lightroom. We kind of take it for granted now, but it was quite disruptive back then. There was a lot of debate, a lot of challenges. And I think similarly to electronic music, we kind of already talked about DJing, but during that same era, the rise of synthesizers, synthesized music, and digital music, it was looked at as a threat. Like, what's going to happen to like analog music? But actually, it created different genres of new expression. And now with Gen AI, LLMs, diffusion models and language models that's used to express your intent, that has the potential to create new art forms. And you've seen artists like Refik Anadol with its generative art to experiential art like Team Lab that create these new experiences. So I'm really excited, not just about how technology can create new art forms, but what people will do with it.
There's an anecdote from our conversation with Dan that I thought, this is just gold.
I will tell you a story. When I was I think I was a senior in high school, maybe a freshman in college, I got this DJing show thing in Stockton, California, which is like 60, 70 miles out of San Francisco. It was a big hall thing and some prominent DJs were there. I probably wasn't as prominent at the time, but like at halftime, these 2 kids came out and started DJing, scratching and cutting and all the stuff, like just local kids, right? And they were really good, right? Like, anyway, the reason I brought this up was because one of them was doing actually a tone and pitching it up and down. They were doing Mary Had a Little Lamb, that kind of thing with the pitch, right? And I was just watching them. It's like just these 2 local kids. I'm like, well, clearly I'm not meant to be a DJ. These guys are doing stuff I'll never be able to do. Like local neighborhood kids are doing this stuff. The punchline to that story is it turns out those two kids were Mixmaster Mike and Qbert. And
Just come a random kids.
and they were fresh. They were like freshmen in high school. I was like a senior or freshman in college, whatever. And I saw that. So those local cats made me not want to do it anymore, like on that level at least.
That's like saying I play hoops and I saw Michael Jordan and or whatever, and like I
Yeah.
decided not to be a baller, right? Like it's like...
Yes, exactly.
When we started this episode and doing the research, the part for me that was so exciting, and it was this idea of DJing and hip hop and culture, and how the 1200 was a beginning, the genesis, the origin of, in some ways, a new medium of expression. I get so inspired to be able to work on things that actually helps you create new art forms, and technology like the Technics 1200 was for me a whole new art form. Hopefully the audience, yourself, a lot of us can appreciate that. It doesn't come along often, but when it does, embrace it and be part of it.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Design Vault, focusing on the legendary Technics 1200 Mark II turntable. A huge thank you to Dan the Automator Nakamura for his time, his generosity, and really his insights that truly brought the significance of this icon to life. We want to express our gratitude and thanks for all the amazing feedback and encouragement you've been sending. We read every note you send on LinkedIn and Instagram, and we've been incorporating a lot of your suggestions and topics, so we really appreciate that. Definitely hit us up on LinkedIn and Instagram. The connection with all of you is keeping us motivated to find new topics and stories. Albert, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you. And catch you all next time.
Thanks again.